guys. We are here with the first podcast of the TGI podcast series. Today with us, we have Mishka. I met her at this poem or like poetic club, something like that, right? Poets Club. And she started it, and it's like a wonderful initiative. And I won't say this to please you or anything, but I think you're one of the finest writers I've come across.
Great. So thank you
And
for having me here. And about the poetic club you mentioned, I actually titled it Kalam, and it's basically I wanted to create a safe space for every writer, poet, because I understood how frustrating it can be to write alone, and that's why probably most writers end up. I mean, most of the finest artists, at least in my experience, for instance, Sylvia Plath, she ended up putting her head in a microwave. So I
right,
understood how lonely writing could be. So I just wanted to create a space where everyone can sort of interact and get through it together.
right. To begin with, how is the COVID been for you? Like,
Scary. I think it's very scary for everybody. I understand that, but I personally get a lot of anxiety because there's so many deaths around us, and so
right,
many people close to my family have also passed away, and it's just
right,
so frightening to think because I live with two diabetic patients, so they're extra sensitive to COVID.
right.
So I think that makes it sad but scary. But overall, I think all of us are very privileged to have the kind of shelter and the insulated lifestyle that we do. So I
Right.
don't think I have a lot to complain about.
Right. And on that note, I want to talk about like how people, especially, and even if they're not influencers, but people have started putting out the resources and everything on like their Instagram IDs. And I think this is like for the first time where we have seen that these social media platforms have come to rescue. And it's
Yeah.
really great to see, right? Because you don't expect these influencers to be helping people directly, and it's happening for the first time. So what do you think about that?
And the most surprising part of it, for me at least, is the age of these influencers and these volunteers. Like 16, 17, 18-year-olds are trying to help and get people resources. And as amazing that it is, it's actually so sad because we're having to take up responsibility that actually doesn't belong to us, it belongs to the government. And I
Right,
actually had somebody who's not very well at my place a couple
right,
of days ago. He's a very close colleague of my father. And I remember scrambling for resources, and something as basic as oxygen wasn't available, be it in hospitals. And there were so many scams going on that there were hardly any reliable sources. And the fact is, it's gotten so bad that you can't reach out to anybody in power authority. I have to reach out to people like influencers who are exactly our age. And that's just
yeah.
so sad.
Mm.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to not be political at this time, right? It's not like, so even the people who was as such apolitical and we like we don't really like want to talk about politics as such, and knew such friends in my circle. But this is the toughest time, right? So you have been tested to your limits, wherein something as normal as oxygen is not being available. I feel for the first time it's very difficult to not be political, right? So I think that's like a big change.
Yeah, very true. But I feel like there's still so many people, even in my circle for that instance, so many people who are still apolitical, who refuse to comment, who refuse to engage in social commentary, who think that, like I've actually had my friends say, एक story डालने से क्या होगा?
Mm.
And when I tell them that even if you can influence one people and one person and you can make them realize that, how bad things actually are, then you're doing your bit. But then there's the argument that I don't have that large of an audience and I'm not an
Mm.
influencer, which is practically futile. I think even if you have 5 followers on Instagram or 10 followers on Instagram, you have somebody who's following you. You technically are an influencer because what you have to say will influence them directly or indirectly. So I think if people are still apolitical, then I think that's the most terrible thing they can do right now because they're so privileged. They
Yeah.
have the power to do something, but they just simply choose not to.
And yeah, it's right. It comes from privilege, right? Where you think it doesn't affect you. Like you
And
don't vote and you're in school, you have a good friend circle. So it doesn't really affect you directly. But
mm,
on that note, I think when people say that they're apolitical as such, I think that's the most political statement to make, right? In my view. Because when you say you're apolitical, that means you decide not to have an opinion. That itself is a very strong opinion to have, where you think it doesn't
And
matter.
and if you're saying that you don't have a political opinion and you don't side with the oppressed people, that technically means that you're complicit. You're siding with the
Right.
oppressors. And I just feel like all of us who have been privileged enough to go to school, have an education, and have parents who are genuinely, literally giving us everything, if we still choose to be a political, then I think that's more of a morality issue than an academic issue.
Right. Fair enough. Like you don't need to be educated when you have to take a moral
Yeah,
stance. That comes just very
yeah,
naturally.
yeah. I have like an aspiring lawyer in my
Mm-hmm.
friend group, and I think you relate to her because last November you were aspiring to become a
Right,
lawyer
right,
too,
right.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So she started reading the newspaper every day, and that's something that I've been trying to do for a very long time. So
Mm-hmm.
I was just generally thinking yesterday that in our friend group itself, now that we have an aspiring lawyer and she's continuously reading about the atrocities which have happened, I've literally seen her shift from an apolitical mindset to such a liberal mindset. Because I'm
Right,
not saying that liberal is right, that's up to you, although I do
right,
feel it is. But I think that's good to see because at least somebody around me is doing it. And suddenly I feel like people are slowly realizing that it's important to finally pick up a newspaper and get awareness. So I think even that's a good thing.
right. But again, that also depends, right? I meet so many people who are reading newspapers or any of the social media, and but it actually depends on what you are reading also, right? I mean,
Mm.
let's take for instance, like there are different ends in the spectrum, right? So even if you're reading, a person is reading the Hindu,
Yeah.
and the person who's reading the Indian Express, the same news will be portrayed very subconsciously in a very different way, right? For example, what I do is I read 3 months the Hindu and then I switch to the Indian Express so that I don't get subconsciously inclined towards one. Because when you're reading editorials every day, which are subconsciously towards the right or the left, whatever that may be, it changes you. It changes your perspective, how you look at things. Because I personally feel that none of your opinions are your own. That's what I personally
Mm.
feel. They're fed to you in a way, right? Your dad tells you something, gives you a fact, that's how you create your own opinion, right? So I think, and the big point is that you never should attach your ego to your ideas, because the ideas are yours, but they don't exactly define you. So it's fine to even change your opinion, because like 4 years back, I remember like I would be supporting, not exactly supporting, but I would feel there's nothing wrong with BJP as such, right? When they first came into power and all that. And initially, I would say that it did, if like if it is directly related to my ego, so I wouldn't change my opinion and I would try to defend every policy. But after that, I realized that it is just the ego. So you can change your ideas every day, and that's fine. And that's something that people should know. कि it's fine अगर तुम अपना opinion change करते हो.
I get what you're saying and I agree. But a part of me also feels that intellectual property sometimes has to have some sentiment attached to it. Like, I know for a fact that I have a lot of sentiment attached to my political opinion because I feel like my political opinion is very directly correlated to the actual atrocities happening in the world. And if I don't act on them emotionally, which might not be exactly the most objective way for me to judge situations, but if I don't act on wrongdoings emotionally, then I don't think I would be half as passionate about politics as I am today. And I wouldn't be writing about, everything that's happening in the world, and I wouldn't be aspiring to make a change. So I feel like, yes, you're right, it's very important to be objective, but at the very same time, I believe we should judge information objectively. But once we've formed an opinion, I do feel like we should fight for it. Mm.
Right. So the only problem that
Yeah.
I have is that I don't believe in the whole policy of being a right wing or a left wing, or for that matter, being central. I just feel that it's too black and white. It can't be so binary, For example, let's say
Yeah.
in a certain issue, I might be inclined towards the right, and in most of them, I might be inclined to left. I shouldn't say that I'm a leftist. Why do I have to be put in a box when it comes to something like politics, which is so vibrant? And I just don't like buy into the argument that, oh, I'm leftist or I'm rightist, which I think is very nonsensical. You should be objective in that sense, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, yeah. I
Right?
get that. I think, yeah, that's actually a very good idea. I feel like if people don't want to conform to labels, that's also fine. But if somebody is
Mm,
very ardently saying that, no, I am a
mm,
leftist and I
mm,
really do believe that liberalism is the way to go, or I am
mm.
a right radical, then up to you, I guess. But as long as you're judging information objectively and then you're forming certain opinions which are substantial, I think it's
Right.
okay. And that's my
Note,
opinion.
I want to start with the writing wala part. So, how did you start writing? And like
I
when?
don't have a very interesting story actually. Like
Mm,
I before this podcast, I was on YouTube and I was looking at various other podcasts with writers, and
mm,
all of them had a very central theme. I noticed
mm,
most of them had this opinion that had this story actually that I wasn't a very popular kid in school when I was young.
mm.
That's why books became my best friend, and I started reading a lot. That's why I started writing a lot. I I don't have something as interesting as that, but I do feel like when I was young, I used to love lying. I used to lie about everything. Like I used to come home, my parents used to ask me what did you do in school, and I'd make up
Mm.
stories that, oh, this guy came to school and he said this to me, and this teacher said this to me. And I
Mm.
understood that while that was a very bad habit, which literally bit me in the ass later on. But I realized that it's because I always loved fabricating stories. So that's why I started writing them creatively, because I understood that what I do on a daily to daily basis, people actually do that for a living. So that's how I started writing, and that's how I understood that if I love lying, it's just creatively lying, and I'll get away with it if it's writing. So that helped, and then I started writing about things which I've actually experienced and things I think deserve more awareness. So yeah, that's how I started writing.
I think that is a very interesting story. But like on that note, I think like the lying part, right? I think it's with everyone to a certain extent, right? So like for example, हाँ मतलब it everyone has their own stories and सबको अपनी story में तो hero बनना ही है ना, like that's the least you can do. अपनी story में तो you can be a hero ना, in दूसरों की you can't, no, you can only do what you can do in your own story. So even I think even the movies or for that matter songs are having that USP, right? So for example, you are watching some rom-com, right? Let's say Notting Hill, right? So now he's a bookstore owner and a celebrity comes in and they fall in love. They're feeding it to you. You want that to be your own story, right? Somewhere or the other, we have always thought, yaar, what if a Bollywood actor or like some celebrity, I meet him someday and then we, in that sense. And I think writing is the best way to do that because in
Yeah.
some way or the other, let's say you meet a person and you have certain conversation, then you're telling that same conversation to someone else. It will always have different versions because
Yeah.
you unconsciously want to be the better person in that conversation, no? And I think it's very natural.
I yeah. I wish that my parents felt that way because my mom's always a very, you know, कभी झूठ नहीं बोलना, and it's
Huh.
always honesty is the best policy. So when I used to lie when I was little, I used to come home and obviously I personally feel like if you lie once, you have to lie 50 more times to make the first story seem substantial.
Hmm.
My mom always used to like give me shit about that why do you lie so much, and that's how I actually stopped lying in reality. So if anybody is watching this and I know you personally, I don't lie to you, but I just do it creatively now.
Hmm. On that note, any recommendations like for the people who are not into like reading poetry because it's very hard ना मतलब हमें लगता है कि सभी पढ़ सकते हैं but like some people don't like the taste of it and they think it's very pretentious and मतलब उन लोगों के लिए what is the end point जिससे अगर कोई interested है कि हाँ you can start here.
I think if people are finding poetry as the entire, like, the entire volume of poetry you find pretentious, then maybe they might not be able to relate with any poem. But
Hmm.
I think people should start with spoken word poetry, is what I feel. I think just go on YouTube, go on Button Poetry, and if you want to try out the Indian poetry forums, you can look at communal, you can look at unerased. And I think because spoken word poetry has so much emotion in it and it's so powerful, I think it's bound to make anybody, feel attracted to it. This is my
Right.
personal opinion, but if you begin with poetry and you found the previous poems pretentious, then start with spoken word, is what I
Right.
feel.
I think that is true because like spoken word is very recent now. Like and all the poets, like let's say the classic poets, it's very hard to relate to them because they're writing about what they were going through at that time. And I think spoken word is much more millennial in that sense.
And I feel in our generation, our attention spans have also become really tiny because since the evolution of TikTok and the evolution of Reels, we used to, consuming content which is of 30 seconds. So
Mm.
our attention span has also become very visual and it's become auditory and it's become very crunched. So I believe that reading books might not be very easy. So start off
Mm.
with spoken word, which might garner your attention, and then you can go about reading contemporary poets. And
Mm.
if you would need recommendations for that, then I would personally recommend Indian Megha Rao, and from the West, Jared Singer. They're probably best poets I've ever encountered, and I believe everybody would enjoy their work.
Right. So on that note, it's a very interesting conversation, right, about the attention span thing.
Yeah.
So when the whole TikTok thing got banned and whatever, and all those things are happening, so this is a very mainstream argument that the problem with TikTok is कि वो हमारी attention span को कम कर रहा है, right?
Mm.
But I do not agree with it because the point is, let's say even for that matter, हमें ये बोला जाता है ना कि आजकल हम movies में हम पूरी नहीं देखते, we check a text in between, or like there's a problem with attention span, है ना? But in my opinion, what I feel is कि what if you're not looking at from the other perspective? Art is not that great. जो तुम देख रहे हो, शायद that is not only engaging ना. Let's say if I'm watching a movie that is great, ठीक है, perfect movie, and it's one of the beautiful pieces of art. I don't think I'll be able to look at my phone, and I think that is the uh, tension that the artist should be taking, not the people who are watching
Yeah,
it, right? And at the same
that's very
note,
bad.
so like जैसे उसमें भी TikTok में भी, I know there is a lot of the cringe as they say, whatever that may be, but I think at the same time बहुत लोग बहुत ज़्यादा creative है, and I think if you're able to hold my attention for the 30 seconds and give me something in that time, I think it's very creative. So that is what I'm saying. I think the whole like the argument that हमारा attention span खत्म हो रहा है, but I think उस perspective से देखो कि हो सकता है कि art भी नहीं है ना उस हिसाब से अब. You're getting movies like I don't know the पता नहीं कौन सी movie, राधे movie. Like what are these
Yeah.
movies? I don't think anybody can see it anyway. But if I'm watching something
Yeah.
which is very interesting.
Mm.
Hmm.
Like, okay, so I post my spoken word poems on Instagram, right?
Hmm.
So earlier, when I started posting them in July, then Reels wasn't a feature. So I didn't have to worry about how engaging I have to make the first 30 seconds. But now I know if I'm about to post, then the massive component of my poetry, the one which truly garners attention, the one which actually makes an impact, has to be in the first 30 seconds.
Right.
That way, attention span has decreased. It has decreased to that our mind will judge that is this content worthy of my time in
But I
just
think
30
that's a
seconds.
great way of looking at it, no? But I mean, with evolution, we also understand कि artist का भी होना चाहिए ना कि you should be good enough कि तुमने उसको attention को catch कर लिया. I think वो तो artist की भी responsibility subtly है. I understand, and the point is कि art भी दो तरीके का है. That is how I see it. Let's say indie music, ठीक है? Indie music has its own rules. Classical music में there is like proper what you can call art form, right? Up now, probably I will not be able to listen to the classical form because that is the art part of it, right? It's not commercial. It is not supposed to be heard by 100 million, 1 billion people. It has its own audience, which respects the art, right? In the same way, let's say paintings भी होती हैं. अब ठीक है, there are paintings जो बिक रही हैं 2 million, $10 million. I can't know कि उसमें क्या worth है, but the person who is buying it उसको पता है कि उसमें क्या worth है. And I think वहाँ पे the point of taste comes. राइट सो व्हाट इफ मैं पोएम में वैसे ही मेरा बहुत ज्यादा टेस्ट है तो आई डोंट केयर मैं 30 सेकंड में जज ही नहीं करूंगा बट द पीपल हु आर नॉट इंटरेस्टेड वुड वांट दैट 30 सेकंड टू बी सो एंगेजिंग कि वो देख लें
Yeah,
इज हाउ आई सी
but
इट
I think
हाँ
Yeah, so I think this argument is okay for artists who've already established their audience, artists who've already reached a very high pedestal and they have like a very loyal audience. But for artists like me, right, who are budding, the entire 30-second argument is kind of frustrating because I don't have a lot of people who would be engaged in what I do. Because for me, I don't have a very large audience yet. I'm still, a budding writer, budding spoken word artist. So my main motive is to get as many people to enjoy those initial 30 seconds as possible. So that's why the onus of it falls on me, granted. Whereas other artists who are probably more established, they don't have to worry about those 30 seconds because they know
Obviously.
even if the first 30-40 seconds are mundane and मेरा maximum climax and impact last के part में है, they
I
don't have
think
to
that
worry
argument
because
also applies to वो रात दे वाला जो movie example दिया था. Now people will still watch it. As absurd it is, Salman Khan के
yeah,
fans or whatever that may be, people will watch it. Right? It has its own audience.
yeah,
Whereas on the other hand, if you're watching a movie like let's say Article 15 or Thappad or all these, which I believe are like beautiful pieces of art, they have to be engaging enough. Right? I do
yeah,
understand
right.
it's unfair to a certain extent, but that is how it works. Now, you have to look at it from the commercial perspective of it is how I see it, but yeah, I get the point what
Yeah,
you're getting at. Yeah.
I agree.
Hmm. On that note, a bit controversial, but I think I will ask you this: what do you think about Rupi Kaur?
I knew this was coming.
uh,
When you said no, some people
because I
find
have tried.
poetry. Yeah,
क्योंकि like I write, I know what poets are and whatever. बट रूपी कौर की आई हैव ट्राइड इट्स नॉट मुझे पहले लगता था कि व्हाट इफ इट्स आर्ट फॉर्म वाली चीज की मेरे को टेस्ट ही नहीं पता इतनी हाई लेवल है वो पोएट्री बट देन आई रियलाइज उसमें कुछ मेरे को कंटेंट मिल रहा ही नहीं मतलब इट वाज मतलब टू वेवी फॉर मी.
yeah, yeah. So basically, I had the same problem a few weeks ago, and coincidentally, I researched a lot about it. Like, I wanted to explore both ends of the spectrum. Do people like her poetry or do people hate her poetry? So I noticed the at least what I saw, most of the people weren't a fan. And I realized it's because what she's doing isn't exactly conventional poetry. When people look at her work, they don't see it as, oh, this is a poem, and I'll read it, and then I'll have to, dissect it, and I'll have to understand the metaphors, and it'll be a journey.
Quotable kind
It's
of
not
things.
that. Yeah, it
Mm.
starts and it ends. So this entire what Rupi Kaur has started with, it's called Insta Poet.
Mm.
She is an Insta poet. And so many people since Rupi Kaur have started doing the same. And I've realized that people might not like it because it's such a new art form, but probably 100 years down the line, more people will engage in it because, as we mentioned, shorter attention spans. That's why people will probably like it more. But at the
Mm.
same time, I admire her. I might not be a fan of her content, but I admire her
Mm.
simply because I think she's a great businesswoman because she's
Mm.
created an empire of her own. I don't know if it's reliable information, but I literally googled last week, and
Mm.
her net worth, at least on Google, it says $1 million, and for a
Yeah.
girl who's in her early 20s and who's a poet, and poets,
Mm.
I don't think necessarily earn much. I think
Mm.
she's done a fabulous job at that. So I admire her business skills, but I'm not a very big
Mm.
fan of her work.
Right. Because I think that's the point. Like, I understand कि it's digestible, and that's why ऐसा तो नहीं कि मतलब she doesn't have a following. 4.3 million for a poet is not very conventional, and I think she has her audience. And but the problem I'm facing is कि ठीक है, it is easy to digest, and I understand. But I'm saying कि does it like give you the allowance कि इसका मतलब तुम इतना abstract कर दो, which you might think is abstract, कि it's very hard to find the meaning itself.
I think
Are
it's
they getting
actually
away
the
with it?
opposite. Yeah, I think it's actually the opposite. I think it's so easy to find the meaning. Like she writes such simple sentences, and because it's poetry, people think because it's offered as poetry, people think, oh no, there must be something at the back of this, something I have to explore, something I'm not understanding, and they correlate it with their own life. That I think this is talking about how I felt then, so I should associate it with loss or abuse or something like that. So I think it's very easily put forward. I think it's very easily thought out. But because all of us are so desperate to probably relate with it, we think that no, I think there's something backhanded, some ulterior like story she has that I have to.
Because I think that's the problem with that is कि लोग are looking for, like, the people are looking for another meaning is because poetry started with basis पे हुई थी ना, कि they were saying कि poetry is something which will not be on surface. That was the whole USP of poetry, कि we will not serve it to you like literature or other books, right? It'll be a bit hard, and that comes with practice. So in that sense, I think obviously she's challenging people and their mindsets and how things have been, and she's successful at it. Like, you can't deny. I mean, that's the point, right? You can not like it, but you can't deny it. She has a following.
Yeah. And I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I know that there's currently a wave going on of Insta poets like Rupi. And there's so many poets who write one sentence or probably 8 words and they pass it off as poetry. But it is poetry. Like, you can't deny art to anybody, and it's very subjective. So if they say it's poetry, then it is poetry. But whether you want to like it, whether you can like it, I think it's a very personal choice. As for me, I admire her as an entrepreneur more than I admire her as a poet.
Very politically correct answer, I would say. But yeah, fair enough. But I think on that argument also, he on the Eminem and all that, I think in one of the interviews, Eminem was asked about the trap music or the auto-tuned rap that is coming. So he was like, "ठीक है, कर लो. It is like whatever you want to call it, but I wouldn't call it hip hop. मैं ये नहीं कह रहा कि don't do it or whatever." But he said, "Ki, I don't think I'll categorize this as hip hop. You can start this as a trap music or whatever you can call it, but I don't think I'll categorize as that. You have to have another box for this time of music." Is what
Yeah, and
he,
Ruby created her own box. Like, she's titled herself the Insta poet. And I think
exactly.
that's very also admirable. Like, the fact that she had the guts to actually come out and say, this is something new that I'm starting. And like it or not, it's me. So,
Right.
yeah, I think. But as for trap music, I'm not a fan. That I have
Thank you
no
so
politically
much.
correct. That I have no politically correct. Yeah, I'm just not a fan.
Okay. On that note, music. What do you listen
Yeah,
to?
music. I might get into a lot of trouble for this, but actually I shouldn't, because in my eyes, Eminem is always was a legend, always will be a legend. He will go. He has gone down in history, and I know a lot of people are trying to cancel him. And I don't endorse any of the sexist and the misogynistic and the violent art he makes. But I believe that I have such a soft corner for him. I don't think I'm ever going to be, not inspired by Eminem. So largely, I do listen to Eminem. And if the answer isn't obvious enough, I also have started listening to indie music. My favorite artist that everybody should check out is actually Karan Sola. If you haven't heard of him already, please do. And yeah, that's it. I think that not only Eminem, I think NF, for me personally, I think he's a brilliant artist. His wordplay is insane. And if we're talking about hip hop, now that you've got me started, Joyner Lucas is somebody who's quite literally saved my life. I have gone back to his playlist when I've been in the darkest of the darkest times. And there's also and he's not very popular, but there's also a rapper called Bit Lowry. He's also a very great rapper. So I know you're into hip hop a lot, so do check him out.
Right. I
I love him a
have.
lot. Lastly, there's this British rapper, Dave.
Dave.
And yeah, don't listen if you don't want to listen to any of his other songs at the time, but just listen to one song. It's called Black, and it's about racism and apartheid. And I think if you're into hip hop at all, and if you're into lyrical rap, which I'm hoping everybody here is, but I think definitely please check all these artists out.
Yeah, right. I'll start with the favorite writer of all time.
Favorite writer of all time. Favorite poet or favorite writer?
Writer, the author.
I hate this question, but I have two.
Yeah.
Khaled Hosseini and I have Malcolm Gladwell. I can bet on these two artists for the rest of my life.
Right. And what have you
Khaled
what did you?
Yeah, Khaled Hosseini, like the first book, like first novel I ever read was from Khalid Hosseini. It was The Kite Runner, and it's a very famous novel. But I read when I was, I think, in fifth, and that's when I knew that I want to read a lot. I love reading, and I knew that I had found my calling. So I think his work probably brought me to reading. So I believe that
Right.
he's one of the finest writers ever. And I've recently discovered Malcolm Gladwell. I don't know
Right.
if he writes fiction, because all the books
Right.
I've read from him are non-fiction, but they're
Right.
very well thought out. They're very intellectually appeasing. So I think both of them. And I've only read one book from this author. Her name's Alice Walker. I've read The
Right.
Color Purple. I know this sounds very dramatic, but I think this book quite literally changed my life. I've been talking about it for so long, like to everybody. Whoever asks me about it, I won't stop talking. And I think it's worth the read.
Right. Acha. On that note, Khalid Hosseini, I think leaving apart the fact that he was also my the first book that I read was
Yeah.
Kite Runner, but he was the first author that made me cry. I still remember I was listening to the audiobook and I was in the park and I was just working out and listening to the book. And I think that scene where um, the boy gets raped, right? As far as I
Yeah,
remember,
son.
and it is
Yeah.
so descriptive. Like you think you're actually standing there, and the whole plot has been made of like before that part. It's all about brotherhood and how strong the connection is. And then he comes down and describes the whole scenario, whatever is going on in there. I was literally in tears, and I was like, "Why the fuck am I crying?" And I was like,
But
"Yeah."
I now understand how descriptive it was, but then
Hmm.
I didn't know that he got raped. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea that he got raped. I remember I kept on like asking around that what happened, and nobody really told me what happened. So I kept on
Hmm.
speculating that who are exactly
Hmm.
what happened in that alley, because it was like literally it turned the entire book upside down. So
Hmm.
I didn't cry then because I didn't understand quite what happened. But in the end, when the protagonist, I'm forgetting his name, he finds out that Hassan is dead. Oh shit!
Hmm.
Spoiler. When he was treating
Ha.
that,
Hmm.
when he finds out that Hassan passed away,
Hmm.
I bawled my eyes out. I cried like a baby.
I think even I didn't realize what was happening in the alley. But the problem was that the audiobook, the guy literally took some time and explained what he thought about that chapter. So he
Yeah.
told his viewers, and then I was like, shit, ye hua abhi. And at that time I was like,
And
huh.
yeah, and तब समझ भी नहीं आता that what exactly is rape, because इतनी young
Right.
age पे कोई सिखाता नहीं, and which is also
Exactly.
very wrong सिखाना चाहिए,
Right.
because sex education is very important. But तो तभी कुछ समझ ही नहीं आया. But like now that I think of it, a very heart wrenching scene, definitely should have made me cry too.
Right. And I used to always think that I want to join, but I never thought I should make one. Like it didn't occur to me. Ki, हाँ, I can start one. So how did it occur to you? Ki, हाँ, अभी करना चाहिए.
I think it occurred to me because I remember I used to write poems, and I never used to post them. I used to post them on my stories. So they'd
Mm-hmm.
vanish after 24 hours. And within those 24 hours, random people on the internet would come, they'd give me feedback, they'd give me constructive criticism, or they'd just give me criticism, they'd give me hate, and then they'd go. Like, and then I'd keep on waiting that, okay, fine, I understand that you didn't like my poem, but tell me what you didn't like about it. Give me some criticism. I had nobody to reach out to.
Right.
And so I'd reach out to seniors in my school who've already passed out, who I remembered they used to write. So I understood that I don't really have anyone I can actually approach for feedback and improvement.
Mm.
So I decided that fine, I'll find somebody, because it can't be possible that if people are actually watching my work, and if my work, that's what was getting traction, then I personally thought to myself, if they're enjoying my work, it's probably because they write too. So randomly, it was actually very impulsive. I took exactly
Mm.
one day to come up with the entire thing, form a group, and within the first day, actually, we had 100 members, and since then it's only grown. So yeah,
Right. I think I was a part of the first video call, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. the very first open mic.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And anything you want to say or like end with?
For having me. I've always wanted to do a podcast. I thought I'd start my own, but then it didn't quite work out. So thank you for having me, and I hope that somebody can hear this and get some insight. But yeah, just thank you for having me. Thank you for watching, guys, and don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to this channel. No, listen, wait, I'll do it again.
Take it, go ahead.
Thank you for watching, guys, and please don't forget to subscribe, comment, like, and share to this channel. And keep waiting. What am I saying? One.
ठीक है, नहीं अब हो गया ऐसे.
कुछ इधर में चल रहे जल से और कुछ ऐसे जो जल रहे हमसे, पर क्या ही लेना इन सब से.